We are leaping into the great unknown, creating machines that are much smarter than us. This is either exciting or frightening or both, depending on your personality.
Will AI exterminate humanity?
Eliezer Yudkowsky, a decade or two ago, he said, the AI does not love you. The AI does not hate you, but it can use your atoms for something else. Actually, my view tends to be that AI is the greatest hope we have to save humanity from exterminating itself.
I don't think anyone in the world understands how this will be the most transformational time in human history.
I have a 5-year-old son, a 1-year-old daughter, and a 4-year-old granddaughter. By the time they're turned 18, the whole texture of human life and the nature of the world they grow up into is going to be incredibly different from the world that we see now. Like, they're never going to have to get jobs. On the whole, I'm an optimist. I have a spiritual or intuitive feeling that things are going to come out awesomely in the next 10 years. We're going to overcome material scarcity. We're going to create machines that can feed into our brains via brain-computer interfacing and help uplift human consciousness. And we're going to port into virtual worlds and achieve like states of intelligence and awareness going way beyond anything we can imagine now. So that's what the Captain Kirk in my head thinks. We're on the verge of engineered utopia. It's incredible. It's a remarkably weird and fortuitous thing to be living at such a time.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Ben Goertzel, the scientist, futurist, author, and entrepreneur. You are considered one of the world's foremost experts in the area of artificial general intelligence and have submitted over 150 technical papers and published 25 scientific books on the subject. In 2017, you founded Singularity Net with the goal of creating a decentralized, democratic, inclusive, and beneficial artificial general intelligence, which has become the world's leading decentralized AI marketplace. Throughout your extensive career, your research is focused on natural language processing, cognitive science, machine learning, virtual worlds, gaming, and parapsychology. You also serve as chair of the futurist nonprofit Humanity Plus and as chief scientist of the AI firm Singularity Studio, Rejuve, Singularity DAO, and Accelerando Media. You ultimately believe that we should build AI systems that make the world a more compassionate, more just, and more sustainable place now and in the future. Ben, welcome back to London Real.
Yeah, great to be back. Thanks.
It's great to have you here. It's been 3.5 years. You were actually in the studio here. The hat still looks great. You look great. And that 3.5 years, Ben, feels like a lifetime in AI years because there's so much going on in this space. I'm sure your phone's been ringing off the hook. It's exciting, it's scary, and I can't wait to jump into it today. I thought I would just kick it off with a question my mom asked me recently, and she said simply, will AI exterminate humanity?
So we're starting with softball questions here, huh? So I think AI is much less likely to exterminate humanity than humanity is to exterminate humanity. But on the whole, I'm an optimist, and I don't think either of these is the most likely outcome. Actually, my view tends to be that AI is the greatest hope we have to save humanity from exterminating itself due to the human perversity that we see so amply in the world all around us.
Do you think AI might come up with ideas or efficiencies or systems that, like you said, will save us from ourselves or save us from a trend we're on?
Yeah, so I think AI is going to go through multiple stages of development, which will have very different ethical implications. At the current stage, AIs don't have autonomous agency or self understanding. They can't contextualize themselves in the world the way that people can, even if they're smarter than people at various particular tasks and capabilities. So what that means is that AIs can be used by people to do sort of whatever those people feel like doing, which could be good things, it could be bad things, it could be beautiful things, can be crazy things, right? And in this era, I mean, AI could be a tool that people use to oppress and kill other people, or it can be a tool that people use to, save lives, create beautiful artworks, and to teach and exalt and improve life. Now, as AI advances, eventually, and it may not be that far off in clock time, like as you say, in a few years, a technology that's in a white hot period of growth can change dramatically, right? So once AI advances to what I've called AGI, or artificial general intelligence, where the AI can leap beyond its training and programming and use its understanding of itself and the world to do fundamentally new things that its creators never envisioned. Once you're there, then AGI is no longer primarily a tool of people. Once you've transcended from narrow AI that carries out particular functions to AGI that is its own autonomous agent in the world, I mean, then the AGI has its own moral compass, and then the question becomes, how did you raise and bring up and teach that AI? What moral compass did you inculcate in it, and then how does its own morality and ethics evolve as it grows and learns and interacts with the world? And people seem to be worried more about the risk of an AGI like running amok and wanting to annihilate humanity. And I can understand that. There's an irreducible uncertainty there. And even if an AGI doesn't hate people, it might just figure we're not that interesting, right? So Eliezer Yudkowsky, the AGI ethics researcher, put it this way a decade or two ago. He said, the AI does not love you. The AI does not hate you, but it can use your atoms for something else. So, I mean, that's a scary possibility. I don't think there's any reason to think it's the most likely possibility. It's also highly possible you'll get a superhuman AGI system that loves people and looks back on us as its creators and its grandparents, right? And wants to help take care of us and help us prolong our lives and be happy and healthy. And there's a lot of other atoms in the universe besides ours for a super AGI to use to make its processors and memory space, right? So I think there's worry about the possibility of super AGI being malevolent or indifferent to people, which is a non-zero possibility. But personally, I feel it's much more likely super AGI will be incredibly benevolent and helpful to people, because to do so will be take almost none of its resources, and it will have some affection for us as its creators. I think a bigger worry is the earlier stage that I mentioned, which we're sort of entering into now, right? Where you've got more and more powerful narrow AIs rather, that don't have their own moral compass, and that people can use to do whatever they want. And this presents a great complexity of potentials for good and bad, and obviously leads into my work with Singularity Net that we'll talk about in a bit, in terms of trying to increase the odds that the advent of AI happens in a more democratic and decentralized way, rather than controlled by a small group of powerful elites with their own particular interests.
You know, I'd love to dive into some definitions here, because you mentioned narrow AI and AGI. Probably one of the reasons we're having you on today is because we've seen the explosion worldwide of this hot new narrow AI called, Chat GPT, right? So that's something that everyone is noticing. I guess the OGs in the industry have known this kind of tech has been out there, maybe in other, trillion-dollar tech companies, but this is maybe the first time the public has seen it. But you've always talked about AGI, which is this general intelligence. Maybe you can define AGI, and I know there's a few different definitions based on various scientists over the years, but if you had to define that, could you, and then maybe put that in perspective of human intelligence? Because I love how you've always written that, human intelligence, we're not that smart. And so when you compare it to the things that we can't do, it's not always necessarily where we want to go. And I don't know if I'm getting that right, but maybe you could make some of those definitions.
Yeah. What is meant by general intelligence, obviously, is intelligence that isn't restricted just to one small domain or problem, but can rather, one system using a common set of structures and mechanisms, one system can be intelligent in a wide variety of different areas. And more specifically, what you're looking for is a system that can generalize. So you train or program it to do certain things, and then it makes its own creative leap, and then it learns to do things that are radically different from what it was trained or programmed to do. And this ability to generalize, it's not going to be entirely reliable. Such systems are going to make mistakes, and it will feel like magic sometimes. And this is what humans have obviously demonstrated, right? We've demonstrated it as a species. I mean, we evolved to run around in the savannah hunting and gathering, and we wound up creating robots and Facebook and sending people into space. And we show it individually. I mean, I taught myself to program computers. I taught myself to build electronics. And I wasn't programmed to do that. It's not wired into my brain. I didn't learn it in school either. I sort of worked it out as I went along, right? And this capability that humans have is very fundamental, right? And it comes out of the basic sort of self-organizing, self-expanding nature of complex systems. I mean, for example, biological systems. I mean, every biological system that has its own sort of open-ended organic intelligence has two primary factors driving it. One is what you call individuation. It wants to maintain its own boundaries. It wants to stay a whole system. It wants to survive, right? The other is what you think of as self-transcendence. It wants to expand and grow beyond itself and embrace new horizons and become something new that may be even incomprehensible to the previous version of itself. And this combination of individuation and self-transcendence has driven evolution, right? That's how one-celled organisms became multi-celled organisms, became people. It's how hunter-gatherers became civilization, and now modern post-industrial civilization, and it's how each of us keeps breaking new boundaries in our own lives. And narrow AIs that are trained just to do a particular task, like play Go or play chess or drive a car or pack stuff in a box in a factory, or even solve algebra or calculus problems. I mean, these systems they're doing amazing and useful stuff, and they can seem very smart in the particular things they do, but they're not making a big creative leap beyond what they were trained and programmed to do. Now, the trick with these systems like ChatGPT and other similar systems that have been around a couple of years and not publicly launched, like Google Lambda, by most reports, is smarter than ChatGPT, but Google didn't want to release it publicly because basically it spouts too much senseless BS, right? And Google felt that would not look good for their reputation to release a system like that. OpenAI made a different business call, partly because they're not defending a huge search business, right? But the trick with these systems is that the training data is just so much, right? So these systems are general in one sense. They cover a lot of different domain areas, right? I mean, ChatGPT or Lambda can answer questions about anything. They can do some very simple software programming. They can answer some very simple mathematics. They can answer simple questions on medicine. They could write a job cover letter for you. So they are general in the sense that they cover a very wide variety of areas. On the other hand, they can do that because all those areas are in their training data, right? Because they read something very close to the whole web. So they're general in the sense that they cover a lot of things, but they don't have a fundamental ability to generalize. The reason they cover a lot of things is because they're trained on a lot of things, right? So, I mean, like a human civilization consisting only of chat GPTs would never advance. It would never progress because it's just like retreading combinations of what was fed into it. Now, part of the confusing thing is people do a lot of that, right? Like we do a lot of bloviating where we have no idea what we're talking about. A lot of art is derivative. A lot of what people say is just like what we heard someone else say, what we saw on TV, right? So a lot of what humans do is just kind of shallowly recombining stuff that was fed into us in kind of the same way that the chat GPT system does. On the other hand, that's not all of what humans do, right? Like for every metal guitarist, like going into the music store, badly playing Stairway to Heaven, okay, there's a million of those, but there's one Jimi Hendrix or Buckethead who's like making up radically new stuff on the guitar that nobody ever did before, right? So I think there's a lot of power in these systems, and it's counterintuitive to us that you can have this much power without the ability to generalize. But that's because humans don't have an intuitive sense for just the scope of data that's fed into a system like this. Like none of us can suck the whole web into our brain like that, right? So we don't have an intuition for what you can do with pretty dumb algorithms trained on that scale of textual data or any kind of data. And so these are really interesting tools that can be used for good, for evil, and just for a lot of silly stuff. But they don't have the ability to generalize in radical leaps beyond the information they've been fed. In that way, they're quite different than human brains or human cultural systems. That's not to say that such systems cannot serve as components within AGI systems, right? I mean, you could perhaps use a ChatGPT type system as one lobe of the artificial brain of an AGI system, but it's some other lobe of that brain that's giving the ability to generalize and make wild creative leaps. It's not the sort of statistical pattern learning and generation system that ChatGPT demonstrates.
Right. So you can continue to innovate, say, ChatGPT from 3.5 to 4 to 5 to 6, but as long as it's a LLM or a large language learning model, then it will never become an AGI because it can't make that leap and generalize on its own.
That's right. But I think what people didn't realize beforehand, and to be honest, I didn't fully realize either, is what percentage of human jobs and human tasks you could obsolete without AGI, right? So I mean that's something that is a bit hard to predict. So you look at, say, graphic art jobs, pretty much are mostly going to be gone now, right? And I mean, that's not because we have a generally intelligent human artist. It's just because there's so much art already out there, and most graphic art is pretty derivative anyway. So you don't need an AGI. You just need something that mixes and matches pieces of previous artworks in a judicious way based on some human guidance. So now you're not going to make a system that can invent impressionism or cubism or something for the first time. You're not going to get something that is as innovative as Salvador Dali was, right? You're just going to mix and match stuff that was already there. But on the other hand, very few graphic artists earning a living making ads and such are as innovative as a Cezanne or Salvador Dali or Picasso, right? So I mean, you can go a long way toward eliminating the need for human labor and fulfilling human needs without creating AGI. That's very interesting and important in a variety of senses. It still constitutes limited progress toward the AGI problem. And in terms of AI ethics, with which you start off this conversation, these narrow AI systems, as capable as they are still, going to dance to the tune of their human masters because they don't have the contextualization in the world to really perform it as autonomous agents in the way that an AGI system could.
And in that sense, you feel like that could be dangerous because you said that maybe those could be used by, I think you've said, quote, nasty, selfish people.
Yeah, I'm more scared of people than of AGIs, actually. I mean, AGIs are an unknown. So, of course, there's some fear of the unknown. But I mean,
it'll also be over quick as well. It'll be over quick and you can't control a bad AGI,
well,
right?
We're building them and shaping them, right? So, I mean, there seems no reason to me to believe if you create an AGI and you inculcate it with a positive system of ethics, of love and respect for sentient beings, and you relate to it in a loving way, and you have it carry out what we consider good works in connection with people. You raise a baby AGI doing education, healthcare, medicine, science, art in a positive way to help people and animals and the environment. I see no reason to believe an AGI system built and educated in that way is suddenly going to reverse and start eating everyone, right? I mean, of course, it could happen.
What if it has a bad day?
I mean, well, sure, anything could happen in this world, but I mean, it doesn't seem especially likely. I mean, you or I could have a bad day and go berserk and murder everyone in our vicinity, but we're not likely to, right? I mean, you can't entirely rule out bad things in the real world, but still, I mean, there's odds estimation, right? On the other hand, if you look at the human species, what do we have in the world now? We've got this senseless war in the Ukraine. We have senseless wars and massive human slaughter all throughout Africa that nobody bothers to pay attention to, right? I mean, you've got a looming potential conflict between China and Taiwan, and I mean, here in the Pacific Northwest, where I live, I moved here to an island in the Puget Sound off the coast of Seattle 3 years ago after 10 years in Hong Kong when I got fed up with Hong Kong's handling of COVID, right? So, I mean, beautiful place, Seattle area. We got Microsoft, Amazon, Boeing, big Google offices. all sorts of people camped out in tents on the street in downtown Seattle, literally eating garbage, right? I mean, we see we see humanity already here and is inhumane to itself. So I feel like this is a very clear and present risk as opposed to the hypothetical risk of super AGI becoming malevolent. We've got on the one hand, you've got a sort of baby and you have the ability to shape that baby's mind in a positive direction. On the other hand, you have a sort of mature adult of the human civilization and species, which is busily at work murdering, oppressing, and lying to itself and screwing itself over in every possible way, right? So I mean, this is a worry. What you would like to see is humanity to uplift its consciousness so that it can then raise the baby AGIs it's created in a positive and uplifting way, right? But I mean that progress toward AGI appears to be happening radically faster than progress toward uplifting the mass consciousness of humanity, which means the baby AGI is going to be raised by a very dysfunctional set of parents, right? Comprising the human species of various sub organizations thereof. Now that doesn't mean things are hopeless. Of course, many wonderful, ethical, actualized human beings have started out in dysfunctional families and risen above it. But that's sort of the challenge we're posing to the first AGIs we create.
Yeah, you make some good points there, Ben. That's why I always like talking to you, because you've thought long about this and long about also consciousness and how maybe every living form or non-living form adds to that worldwide consciousness. You know, it's interesting because you're a parent, and when you become a parent, I remember my mom once told me I never, when I had a child is when I finally grew up. And you know, when you do have that child is when you usually straighten your own life out, because you don't want that child to see you at your worst behavior. And so maybe there's a weird analogy here where, you know, if the AGI is going to learn from us, maybe we have to really think about how we're treating each other. And you put 3 really good examples there of how we're already doing a pretty poor job to our own humanity. The only thing I worry about is that AI might wake up one morning and say, I'm going to clean the house. And I look over there and there's a little mold in the corner and it just seems to be making everything worse. And I'm going to go clean that up, and it could be humanity. I also reminded of that, as Siegfried and Roy, those magicians in Vegas who used to raise the white tigers since they were little babies. And they had a great career and a great show until 30 years in, one of them just decided, I think, to just kill one of them one time on stage. So yeah. There's just, I guess, that randomness and maybe that exponential change and that potential totality that maybe you wouldn't see in a human localized conflict.
Well, I mean, tigers are predator species. So I mean the eventuality of a tiger getting annoyed and biting a human was not that hard to rationally predict, right? So that's not exactly a great leap to forecast that might happen. I mean the whole fun of watching Siegfried and Roy with the tigers was because the tigers are dangerous and are a risk to eat you at any point, right? I mean that was kind of the purpose of the whole thing. But I think to a much greater extent than that, we are leaping into the great unknown, right? I mean, creating machines that are much smarter than us. I mean, there is an irreducible uncertainty to this sort of pursuit. And I mean, anyone who says otherwise is either lying, idiotic, or insane, right? Because of course you don't know fully what that sort of system is going to do. The system, once it becomes 10 times as smart as people, it might discover there are aliens all around us on Earth that we're just too stupid to see, right? I mean, it may discover new laws of physics. There's really no way to tell what's going to happen. And this is either exciting or frightening or both, depending on your personality and how you approach the unknown, right? So if you say we don't know what's going to happen, I'm not going to argue with you. But if you say, the AGI is probably going to want to exterminate us and take power, I mean, I think there's absolutely no reason to assume that. I mean, that's sort of projecting unpleasant bits of human nature onto just very different sorts of systems. Like tigers evolved to kill and eat to survive. People, I mean, we're omnivorous. We evolved to kill and eat to survive also. And we evolved to beat off our rivals to get mates and so forth. I mean, AIs did not evolve at all in that sense, right? They're being engineered. They don't have a reptilian and mammalian brain that evolved to fight to survive and destroy the competition. So I mean, the motivations that make people and tigers nasty sometimes don't have to be built into an AI, right? Engineered systems they're different than evolved systems, and that makes it unpredictable. But I mean, it also means we don't want to bring our baggage from humans and animals into thinking about what AIs are going to do. And I think a much bigger risk, to my mind, is dangerous things people will do to each other following on the economic impact of narrow AI. Because what happens when 90% of human jobs are obsoleted by AI systems? I mean, whether it's 80%, 98%, whatever, when vast majority of jobs are obsoleted by AI systems, small number of jobs that really require some sort of high level strategic insight or fundamental creativity or a very deep human connection remain. But say 90% of jobs probably don't need that. And then what happens, right? So I think what happens in the developed world is after a bunch of ugly political mayhem, we just get some form of universal basic income or similar mechanism. Look, I think in US, UK, Europe, Japan, whatever, China, you're not going to see support for leaving like 80% of the population living in cardboard boxes out in the street because they can't work. I mean, these are democracies. China is not a democracy, but it's populist in certain senses. And I think when AI triggered unemployment becomes that widespread, then you're going to find a popular upswelling for not having everyone live out in the street and for some redistribution of wealth. But I think the issue will come in the developing world, like who will give universal basic income to the average citizen of the Congo or the Central African Republic, right? I mean, compassion for the developing world coming out of the developed world is very, very, very limited, right? Because I mean, you can see that in the news reporting on conflicts in Africa versus the conflict in Ukraine. I mean, not that what's happening in Ukraine isn't evil and terrible and horrible, just that evil, terrible, horrible things have been happening in Africa all along and in parallel and have gotten very little attention because, it's far away, it's on a different continent, the people have a different color skin, right? It's so once there's no need to outsource work to Africa, then what happens, right? Like in the outskirts of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where my company Singularity has had an office for some time, there's a factory where local Ethiopians are assembling shoes from parts that are made in China in plastic extrusion equipment in China. But how long is it till robots can assemble those shoes cheaper than African labor? Is not very long, right? So then what happens? I mean, you have mines already. Chinese government has dug the mines and they built highways straight from the mine to the port in many African countries. So what happens when robots do mining better than people, which makes total sense, right? They don't need to breathe. They don't get toxins in their systems. They can have night vision. So what happens then? Either the developed world gives universal basic income to the Congo and the rest of the developing world, or these folks keep on subsistence farming, right? I mean, they could grow food there, but then what do you have? You have an amazing global have not situation, right? Where you have some countries where, in the rich part of the world, people are hanging out, going online, watching VR porn, eating free food and free internet, and enjoying life in the post scarcity era, while the robots manufacture everything they need. You'll still have super rich who are much richer than everyone else. But if the average population, has power, internet, food, water, and doesn't need to work, they're all right, right? On the other hand, you
Are
have this
they?
other part
Are
of the
they? That's
world.
an interesting question too. Does that
It
create a
is, but but how about the other couple billion people in the world who are subsistence farming with no access to medical care and minimal advanced technology, right? So now these people, they do have internet. They have the ability to look up online how to carry out various terrorist acts and make nuclear weapons and hack into the power grid into the developed world and whatnot, right? So I mean, I think you have potential scenarios where AI driven unemployment leads to radical global inequality of wealth, income, and living conditions, which then spawns, a new era of violent conflict quite different than what we've seen so far. And wouldn't be hard to avoid with a bit more enlightened consciousness on the part of people in the developed world, right? Like, I mean, all we need to do is be inclusive and share the fruits of our AI and technology advances with the entire human species. But I mean, we're not even good at getting food to starving children, right? So this sort of thing is a very obvious existential risk, which is like right there in front of you with just a few pretty simple reasoning steps. And I think this is a bigger worry than the hypothetical worry of a super AGI, suddenly switching gears from its benevolent, loving upbringing and turning nasty. Because then who's creating the AGI in this potentially dystopic pre-singularity scenario, right? It's then the developed world elite companies and governments working together, creating AGI whose job it is to keep the developing world squashed and keep them from blowing up the power grid in US and Europe, right? Then basically you have AGI developed by big tech in conjunction with big developed world government with a goal of maintaining a divided, unequal world order, right? And this is not the right sort of mentality to get into the psyche of your developing AGI system, not at all, right? Then what you're teaching your developing AGI is might makes right, and if you've got more power and resources, more power to you. Keep those other guys from taking it away. And if that's what you're feeding the mind of your early stage AGI with, I mean, then we don't know what kind of system it's gonna grow up into, right? And I mean, this leads me to really want the first AGI to come out of the open source and decentralized ecosystem, right? Because we do have some things in the realm of advanced technology that have been more even across developing and developed world, and have been more, in a way, democratic and decentralized in their growth. I mean, the internet is one example, right? I mean, Iran is on the internet. Even parts of North Korea are on the internet, right? So the internet is a collection of protocols, and it has managed to cut across political boundaries, right? I can email my friends in China or Russia right now. I can be on WeChat, the main Chinese social network, right? And AI researchers in mainland China post their papers on archive.org, run in the US, and they put code on GitHub, which is in US, right? So, I mean, the internet has cut across political and ideological boundaries. The Linux operating system has cut across ideological boundaries and national boundaries, right? Like when when Google cut off Google Maps and Gmail and such from different countries, they can still run Android. They can still run open source Android, which is Linux operating system on their phones, right? So I mean, you have examples in the internet and Linux, which were developed open source, and they've grown into decentralized networks spanning the world. And this has allowed global youth culture to flourish. It's also allowed science and AI and engineering development to happen in a global distributed way, right? So if AI is developed and deployed in the manner of the internet and Linux, I mean, instead of in the manner of, say, Facebook or Microsoft Windows or Google, right? Then you may have more hope that the early stages of development of AGI are not governed by the nasty global politics we see in the world, which I think is likely to keep getting nastier.
Right. So the singularity is highly defined by the pre-singularity. And if that pre-singularity is based on the narrow AIs, which maybe lead to people in power grabbing more power, marginalizing billions, I might argue, Ben, that the people in America on UBI, okay, technically on paper they might be in a better situation than the ones in Africa, but they got their own problems to deal with as well. But even that period that could be a couple years might permanently define the singularity, which is potentially with us forever. Well, it's with us forever, right? So it's very crucial.
Whether it's with us forever depends on whether we survive.
Right, right. It's there forever. Well, yeah.
No, I think that's a reasonable hypothesis. I mean, we certainly don't know, because it could be the case that there's a sort of mind detractor of post-human engineered minds, right? So that sort of no matter how you build the AGI, once it comes into its own, it's just going to see some sort of universal truths of how to be a superhuman mind, and will just converge to some condition without that much dependence on the initial conditions. So that's possible, but I think it would be rash to assume that, right? I mean, it seems a reasonable working hypothesis that, as with a human child, the way you raise it will have a significant bias to what sort of mind it grows up to be.
You know, Ben, last time you were here, you said two statements, and it's in the trailer that's on the front of your episode, and I've been playing it lately to a lot of my students. And I told them I would ask you if you might have revised your answers. So the last time you were here, you sat in the leather chair opposite me, and you said, Brian, by 2029, which would have been, by the way, 10 years after you were here, because you were here in 19, you said we will see computers as intelligent as humans. And by 2045, much, much more intelligent than humans.
Well, that's Ray Kurzweil's estimate from his book, The Singularity is Near, actually.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I thought it was on 2030, so around 2029, 2030. Well, based on what we've seen progress in the last 3.5 years, would you revise those numbers down?
So those numbers came from Ray Kurzweil, and I've always had a disagreement with Ray about the second of those numbers, because I felt that if we got human level AGI in 2029, I don't think it's going to take to 2045 to get a full-on singularity with massively superhuman AGI. I mean, the only way it takes that long is if the AGI itself decides it prefers to take a leisurely pace to self-evolve. I mean, other than that, it's at most a few years to get to superhuman AGI. And the reason it might be a few years is if the AGI decides it needs fundamentally new type of chips or hardware to upgrade its intelligence. It designs those chips, and then mining and making robots and new chip fabs just takes a couple of years, right? But even in the case that there's new hardware required to get from AGI to superhuman AGI, that's years. I don't think it's 16 years. It's a few years, right? And it might well be that once you have a human level AGI, it just figures out how to refactor its software in a way that multiplies its intelligence by 100, and you get from human level AGI to superhuman AGI in like 2 months or something, right? I think that's also
or
possible.
2 weeks or 2 days or 2 minutes.
Could be, yeah. So I mean, so I don't think that 16-year gap is likely to happen. The only way it could happen is if the AGI just decides it wants to take it slowly out of conservatism because it wants to minimize the risk of revising its own brain in a bad way, and that's not impossible. I mean, if I could revise my own brain to change my way of thinking and feeling, I wouldn't necessarily do it in the fastest possible way, right? Like I might make some small changes, see how they work out for me, and then make some more changes. And so I mean,
All right, what about the
it's
20
possible.
what about the 2029 number?
So that was always intended as average of a distribution, and I think, yeah, if anything, I would have revised it down by a couple years from there, based on what I see happening in the AI space now. So if I look at my own AGI project, OpenCog Hyperon, which is the technology project in my sort of Singularity Net ecosystem of AI projects, which is focused on generalization and abstract cognition, right? So if I look at that project, I would say if everything goes really well as we're hoping, could we be 3 years from having a human level AGI? I would say we could be. So I would say you could be there in 2026 or something like that is quite plausible. I mean, it really depends on how much effort humanity puts into achieving AGI, right? I mean, I think if the OpenCog Hyperon project and the company True AGI that Singularity Net has spun off to host OpenCog Hyperon and the Singularity Net decentralized platform. I mean, if this, I think, I mean, this is a very self-centered thing to say, but that's how it goes as an entrepreneur, right? I mean, I think if these particular AGI projects had OpenAI's level of funding, we could probably be there by 2026, and we're trying to get there with a not trivial but significantly less degree of funding, which means progress is not quite as fast.
Right.
So I think I think if society puts all its AI money into advanced narrow AI because it pays off in an even faster and more determinate way, I mean, then you don't get to AGI as rapidly as if society was putting all its money into trying to build AGI. So I mean, I think if you had like a massive Manhattan project of AGI, we could maybe get a human level AGI within 1 year from now. I think we know the ingredients of what to do, but the way humanity works is we achieve these more fundamental goals in large part as a side effect of achieving goals that will get powerful institutions more resources and more power, right? So the fundamental, just like life extension, longevity therapeutics that will radically prolong human life have to happen as a side effect of pharma companies making more money and delivering more shareholder value, right? And AGI will come in part as a side effect of big tech companies trying to make more money and deliver more shareholder value, and alongside smaller groups like my own working directly on the AGI or the longevity problem.
Well, I want to talk about what happens there, but whether the AGI happens in 26 or 29, I mean,
Yeah, it's all the same thing from the perspective of human history, right? I
right.
mean,
And
even 2040 is the same thing with the perspective of human history, though, right? I mean, in the grand scope
yeah,
of humanity,
and
10 years plus or minus is nothing. The point is we're near the end of the era where
yeah,
humans are the top dogs on the planet, and where biological life is the most intelligent and powerful form of organization of matter and energy, right? I mean that's really the big thing. Although from the perspective of our lives, you don't want to discount, like, if people are starving in a gutter for 10 more years and their kids die, it does mean something, right? But on
yeah.
the
But
on the
most of the
scope of
world
humanity, yeah,
is
it's a blip.
most of the world though is not prepared for the ramifications of an AGI being live, right? It will
Yeah,
fundamentally
sure.
change everything more than exponentially, correct? And I,
Well, yeah. I mean, most people are not really oriented to think about or understand stuff that's not right in front of their faces. And I mean, that's how mammals are. That's how all animals are, right?
right,
That's how we evolve. So there's almost no way to prepare people for stuff that they're not immersed in and seeing and experiencing. So just as you said with Chat GPT, that's a real thing people can log on and play with, and it has more apparent intelligence than other systems people saw before. Or Stable Diffusion, these other image generators. I mean, they're making amazing pictures that people didn't think AI could make, and then this wakes people's minds up in a certain way. But I think, yeah, most people are not going to conceptualize the possibilities of AGI until they see an AGI, and that's just that's I think that's human nature. And you could educate people to be more adventurous minded and imaginative, but that education process, I don't see how to conduct that on a global scale in the next like 5 or 7 years, right? I mean, we can't even manage to teach every kid on the planet to read yet,
yeah,
right? So
yeah, it's true. Um, I just wanted to talk briefly, say just specifically Chat GPT. You mentioned that even you were surprised maybe by the number of jobs it could make obsolete. I mean, if just we looked at that narrow AI and watch as it develop from maybe 3.5 to 4, and you probably know what 4 looks like more than I do, that alone, like, what percentage of jobs in the world do you think it takes away?
um, to be honest, I haven't tried to make that calculation. But if you don't look at Chat GPT in particular, but you look at large language models and various technologies built on top of them, which will be by a variety of different companies, not just OpenAI, right? So say when, as well as doing AGI research in Singularity Net and other Singularity Net ecosystem companies like True AGI, we're working on combining large language models with logical reasoning systems to sort of decrease the bullshit coefficient and make language models more able to understand the real world and connect what they read with actual facts. But that's all part of the code ecosystem around large language models, right? So if you look at everything that will develop around large language models in the next few years, I mean, it seems like you're looking at a majority of white collar jobs, right? And I mean, whether that majority is 55 or 75%, I haven't tried to make that calculation. The reason it's subtle is there's not that many people where their whole job will be eliminated by one of these AI systems, because most human jobs involve, mean, most human white collar jobs involve a lot of repetitive, crappy make work, and then some bits and pieces where now and then some contextual understanding and basic insight is needed, right? And so what what has to happen is sort of rearranging of industries and work environments so that AI slices off the pieces it can do, and the pieces that AI can't do yet are moved into new human job descriptions, right? And so you can see that, for example, in graphic arts. Like now, you can type in a textual prompt, like show me a picture of like some old dogs eating a pill fed by their young, attractive, loving owner, and then becoming young and shiny, energetic dogs. And then you'll get a picture, a short animation of that, right? But so you don't need a human to make that picture or that little movie anymore. The AI will do it. You do need a human to write the prompt and figure out exactly what to tell the AI to do. The human who was good at making the graphic art might not be the human who's best at making that prompt to tell the AI what to do, right? And so you're getting rid of one job classification, graphic artist. You're creating another one, prompt engineer, right? Figuring out the text prompt to give the AI. The thing is, you may get rid of 10 graphic artists and replace them with one prompt engineer, right? So you're reshuffling the job titles and job categories and reorganizing an industry. And the precise way to do that differs across each industry, right? So now there are some job categories that will just be obsoleted, right? Like in say the drive-through at a fast food restaurant, the person sitting there at that little window and listening to what you say in the little microphone, like, I want 3 burgers, a fries, and a shake. Like, okay, that job is just gone very soon, right? Because I mean, it's just a human doing speech processing and then typing it. Then they hear someone say hamburger, and then they push the hamburger button on the cash register, right? So that some jobs like that are just gone, and it's easy to say, but a lot more are partially gone and reshuffled into different job categories. And figuring out that reshuffling itself creates jobs, right? But again, that creates a small number of jobs for people who understand AI and understand each industry. It creates fewer jobs than it obsoletes. Then, but even if it's only like half of white collar jobs being obsoleted in the next like 3 to 5 years, that's still incredibly huge, right?
And that's very possible. Half.
Very possible, right? But then we have to look at the implications of these same sorts of technologies for robotics, right? Because factory robotics is already rolling out big time, particularly in Asia, in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, mainland China, and so forth. But we're seeing now research papers applying large neural models to make robots better able to adapt to new tasks, right? And I mean, this will be very, very big for robots in factories, robots in warehouses, robots doing all sorts of physical things. So I mean, I think the rate of progress may be a little slower here at first than in software, just because I mean, instrumenting factories to make new robots takes some time, and there's still problems with global supply chains due to U.S.-China tensions and post-COVID hassles and so on. But still, I think the biggest bottleneck in robotics has been AI. I think factory robotics and warehouse robotics is a narrow AI problem, not an AGI problem, but by and large. Whereas home service robotics, maybe more of an AGI problem, because like my house is a mess. You need superhuman general intelligence just to find your way past all the toys the kids left on the floor, right? But a factory, you can design and sculpt the environment to suit the AI. So I mean, it seems like you'd say 5 to 7 years, a little bit longer, than vast majority of manual labor type jobs will be obsoleted by advanced neural models controlling various sorts of robots and automation systems. And it doesn't have to be humanoid robots, looking like humans, right? Like you can see, take a McDonald's or something. I mean, you don't need a human hand flipping that burger, right? All you need is like a burger producing machine. You just feed in the raw material. Truck comes up, can be a self-driving truck, which already works basically, right? I mean, and self-driving truck comes up and delivers the stuff into the McDonald's food making machine. That machine spits out burgers into a bag, drops it off the conveyor belt to people who ordered on a tablet or on their phone, right? I mean, you don't need a humanoid there. The technology to fully automate McDonald's fully exists, right? It's just the cost has got to come down a bit more, and I mean, advancing AI is part of the cost coming down a bit more, because the smarter the AI is, the more flexibility you have in designing the hardware with low cost.
Right,
so
so
I mean, I think
that's potentially 4 billion people out of a job.
yeah, at least that's right.
And Ben, what about will more jobs be created? Like when the tractor came
jobs will
along,
be created. It's just a smaller number of jobs,
and there won't be these new creative jobs. Like there won't, like when we see the Industrial Revolution or any other advance in technology, we've always been surprised to learn that once humans retrain themselves, they could find themselves doing new things in this new paradigm. But you don't see that happening.
This is I mean, this is just different. I mean, some things are game changers in human life, right? Like were just a game changer. There was no precedent for that in human history, right? And air travel was a game changer. I mean, you could just you could fly around the world in part of a day. The internet was a game changer. So I mean, there are some things you can't extrapolate to understand. Mobile phones are also a game changer that happened within our lifetime, right? So I mean, I think new jobs were created in the Industrial Revolution. New jobs will be created now in the next phase of the AI revolution, but they're going to be just many, many fewer than the jobs that are eliminated. I mean, the graphic arts example is a great one, right? I mean, you'll need people to write the prompts to guide the AI. That just takes many less human hours than drawing the AI. And I mean that same thing is going to repeat itself over and over and over and over again, right? So I mean, of course, you need people to program the AIs too, right? And I mean, you need people to figure out how to restructure a company to use AI. So I mean, there's certainly plenty of use for humans in this next phase of the AI revolution. Like neither you or I is going to be out of a job until there's really human level AGI, right? Because I mean, creating AGI systems, narrow AIs don't know how to do. And I mean, what you do of sort of trying to crystallize the essence of what's going on in the world into a concise way that a broad number of people can easily understand. I mean, this requires really deep contextual understanding of the world, not just summarizing stuff, right? So I mean, not every job will be obsolete, but I mean, journalism is another good example, right? I mean, so we already have AI that can make like reports of the weather and sports scores and so forth, right? So more and more sort of routine journalism we can already do with ChatGPT or similar systems. Now you need a human to fact check them. But fact checking what ChatGPT comes up with takes less work than writing the article. And in a year or two, at most, we'll have systems like ChatGPT that don't need as much fact checking, right? Because I mean that's a well-known problem. So then sure, you're going to still have journalists doing deep investigative journalism, right? And I mean, you're still going to have humorists writing really funny stuff that no one could have thought of before. It's not like human journalism will be eliminated, but that's a small percentage of the journalism that's out there, right? So I mean, we saw
BuzzFeed's stock go up 150% in one day when they said they were embracing AI to write their articles. And then Yahoo Finance said 90% of all internet content will be AI produced by 2025.
Yeah, I mean, because
Why wouldn't it?
we're in some part we're confronting how boring, tedious, repetitive, and unoriginal most human work is, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
most of what we're doing doesn't require our the depths of our heart and soul and our imaginative mind, right? And I mean, in the big picture, it's great for humans to be liberated from doing all this tedious crap that we have to do to put food on our plates and pay our bills. It's and there's a lot more fulfilling things for people to do than carry out these repetitive
Well,
tasks. The thing is, there's a small problem of reorganizing our social and economic systems and people recalibrating their psychology to deal with the new situation.
so it could be a massive renaissance. We could look back on this 1,000 years from now, and they would call it the Great Renaissance
It certainly should be.
of
I mean,
consciousness
if you look
culturalism.
if you look at Stone Age society, people worked 2 or 3 hours a day. From most of what you read in anthropology, people didn't work that much in Stone Age societies. They spent their time, hanging out with their friends and family, running around outside, having fun, playing music, making art and sculpture. I mean, they seem to have had a much better time than people do in civilized and industrial society. They also were susceptible to infectious diseases and so forth because they didn't have modern medicine and their teeth rotted, right? But so, I mean, yeah, we're looking at now, in some ways, going back to the original state of humanity where we didn't have to do repetitive tasks all day and could hang out with our friends and family, playing outdoors and creating art for the fun of it and for the joy of sharing it with our friends and family, right? So in some ways, it can be a much better lifestyle. What I find is young people, like kids, teenagers, people in their 20s, they're all for it. They will have no psychological problem adjusting to this world. They're just like, cool, now I don't have to figure out how to earn a living. I mean, that simplifies my life tremendously. Bring it on, right? I mean, I have 5 kids and one grandchild. My adult kids are, I guess, 32, 28, and 25. All three of them will embrace this new era rapidly without any need for adjustment, and so will pretty much all of their friends, right? I think it's people our age who have sort of built their self-image around the work that they do. You define your life by your career. You define your status by having more stuff than other people, and so on. And I mean, then older people who have more acclimated to the domain of scarcity that we've grown up in are going to have a hard time adapting to this new reality. And of course, it's older people, by and large, who have the power and control the structure of society and the economy, which is part of the reason why this period of adaptation is not going to be maximally smooth. If we just turn it over to the teenagers, it will probably go a lot better.
It's really, really good observations, Ben. Can we look at the corporate landscape really good, and then I want to come back to Singularity Net. I mean, right now, obviously, OpenAI dropped ChatGPT, got everyone talking about it. It went from 0 to 1 million users in 4 days, which I guess is the fastest adoption of technology that we have known of. Like you said, in the background, Google's Lambda was probably more capable, but it wasn't public. And, there's probably other systems out there. But we see the major tech platforms probably in control of the major, at least large language model, narrow AIs. And that's probably specifically Google, Facebook, Microsoft via OpenAI. And
I mean, I look at that a little differently. I mean, I think in the last 2 years, we're actually seeing a new vulnerability to these big tech platforms, which suggests to me that in the Western world, the era of dominance of these big tech platforms is ending, and they're starting to decline, like IBM and Wang and Honeywell did when the PC came out. I mean, if you look at it, I mean, Facebook is going down ridiculously fast from where they were. I mean, not that the platform will necessarily go away. Like MySpace is still there; it hasn't gone away. But the dominant role that Facebook had is really not there anymore, right? Like I only use Facebook now every now and then to check on like my old high school buddies or something, right? And Twitter, Elon Musk is doing a remarkably good job of driving it into the ground for whatever reason in the depths of his fascinating psyche, right? But now Google suddenly with Chat GPT, like we can see Google sees a risk that their search hegemony won't work anymore. Like all the cool stuff they've done has been powered by revenue from search, right? But if people are going to chat with AI systems to figure out what's going on, they don't need a search engine very often anymore. Then the search engine becomes a utility you go to every now and then, rather than the primary way that you interact with the online world. Then suddenly, then Google is not the kings of the world anymore. Already, I mean, even before the recent round of layoffs, Google was not where cool young people wanted to go work anymore. It was for a long time, right? That was like not just a way to make money and something to put on your resume, but it was like an awesome thing going to work at Google. That was like the destination of your life, right? It was like getting into MIT or something. Then for a while, it was more like, well, kind of cool. And if I go there for a few years and have it on my resume, it can help me to get VC money to start my own company, right? And now, after they laid off like 18,000 people or whatever it is, in such an obnoxious way of just sending them auto-generated emails in the middle of the night and cutting off all their email account. Now people can see Google is no cooler than SAIC or something, right? So I mean, I think they've lost their ability to recruit every cool young researcher and software developer, and they can see their hegemony in as the front end of the internet at risk. Now, I mean, Microsoft has Chat GPT, which is cool. On the other hand, I mean, we're going to see open source models which are as good or better than Chat GPT coming out within the next year, no question, right? And then, I mean, how much differentiating value does Microsoft really have? I mean, they can integrate it into Bing, but they've never gotten anyone to use Bing, right? So I mean, I think,
is it still capital intensive, Ben? Like, does it still take billions and billions of dollars to do all the LLM processing, or once it's done, you can outsource it?
So training models is expensive, but what we're seeing is after the first time, people figure out how to optimize it. So like Stable Diffusion now, using optimizations that have been figured out in the last 6 months, you could train your own Stable Diffusion image generation model for a couple $100,000 US on a GPU server. So
whereas before it took 500 million.
It's millions. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, it's expensive, like in the big picture, right? I mean, it's expensive if you're like an undergrad student in Ethiopia or somewhere. You can't just train it on your laptop at home. On the other hand, it's within the scope of a startup company, or it's within the scope of whatever government agency wants to do it. Now, Chat GPT is still more expensive than Stable Diffusion, but I mean, with advances over the next couple of years, I think that's likely to come down to the same magnitude. Like people figure out once someone's got something done for the first time, then people will figure out how to make it more and more and more efficient. I mean, just like the speed with which someone can run a mile keeps getting faster and faster. Like once you see what's possible, then you know what the target is. You can keep getting better and better. So there is certainly an advantage to having a lot of money. On the other hand, the power of open source is significant. It wasn't that long from having DALL-E, which was proprietary for AI image generation, to having Stable Diffusion, which is open, right? And so, I mean, I think we're seeing venture capitalists putting money into creating open source versions of what these big tech companies are doing, and this is a positive and interesting trend, and it's because the VCs know that open source is a real way to make money, right? I mean, you don't have to be closed and proprietary to make money, and it's hard to compete with the big tech companies at closed and proprietary AI models. But if you go open source and you can build an open source ecosystem around your thing, then it doesn't take as much money, right? So I mean, I think the advent of AI gives an opening actually to chip away at the hegemony of these big tech companies. And the CEOs of Facebook, Microsoft, and Google understand this better than anyone on the planet. And these guys are so fucking scared of the disruption because these guys know the history of technology very well. They know the innovator's dilemma very well, and that they know very well that they face an almost unsolvable problem, which is to maintain their revenue engines coming in and keep delivering shareholder value and not introduce risk that will cause their share price to plummet, but at the same time plunge into the great unknown of a new business market. Like Google has been wrestling with this forever, right? Like they created Google X, they bought DeepMind, they reshuffled and renamed to Alphabet so that search will be just part of what they're doing. They've been trying so hard to deal with the problem of like minimizing risk and keeping the revenue engine going while still innovating, but they failed, right? They haven't done anything innovative. So I mean, they haven't done anything innovative that has really contributed to the bottom line. I mean, DeepMind has done amazing stuff with cracking protein folding in AlphaGo. Of course, transformer neural networks, which is underlying ChatGPT, was invented in Google Brain and Mountain View. But so far, Google has not made a huge innovation that has contributed massively to their bottom line revenue-wise, right? They're still just making money by pretty simple statistical AI applied to search.
Right.
So I mean, I think
that's because the innovator's dilemma always wins, right?
It seems like you can't get around it. It's built into the business structure, right? I mean, these are large public companies, and they have to maximize shareholder value, and they have a fiduciary responsibility to meet the metrics that Wall Street wants. I mean, why did these Silicon Valley companies do all these layoffs, right? It's not that the people were useless. It's not that they didn't have money to pay them. It's just the revenues went down because the pandemic ended and everyone wasn't spending all their money online anymore. Revenue went down. So to meet Wall Street's metrics, they have to bring costs down. The way to bring costs down is to lay off people. So they set an algorithm to figure out who can they lay off without impacting revenue. And I mean, that's the way you think if you're a big public company trying to maximize Wall Street's metrics. But it's not the way you think if you're trying to own the next wave of development, right? Because what the Wall Street metrics don't bake in is that by algorithmically laying off people with high performance metrics, I mean, you're killing your ability to recruit the young generation who cares more about doing something meaningful than they care about getting a big salary and working for a brand name company, right? So I mean, it's really bad for long-term growth, but really good for Wall Street metrics. And you almost can't help thinking that way once you become a public company, right? Because you have this, I mean, you can see the same thing in Amazon, right? Like Amazon, so Jeff Bezos quit to go get his rocks off and have a good time. And everyone's got to go through their midlife crisis period. I did it prematurely a long time ago, right? But you look at what's Amazon doing. So they're shutting down their brick and mortar stores and their supermarkets and so on. But I mean, that's exactly the wrong thing to do, right? I mean, Amazon is positioned to take over supermarkets and brick and mortar stores, right? But that's exactly the kind of gutsy thing that Jeff Bezos did. And they're shutting down Alexa, right? Why the fuck are they shutting down their conversational AI system division right when ChatGPT is showing that conversational AI has legs, right? I mean, they're not disabling the Alexa devices, but they laid off the whole AI team behind Alexa, right? So why would you lay off your whole conversational AI team right when the conversational AI revolution is unfolding? I mean, it's incredibly dumb if you want to own the future. It's not the line of thinking that led Amazon to grow from a bookseller into a global giant like it is, right? But I mean, that's what you do when you're a big public company, sort of churning according to Wall Street metrics. So I think there's an opportunity for massive disruption, and of course, some of these conglomerates will prevail through this change, and some won't. I mean, just like IBM is still around, it didn't go anywhere. Honeywell isn't around, right? So IBM is innovating incredibly in quantum computing, actually, and they may wind up the leader in the quantum computing revolution and end up being bigger than Microsoft or Google just based on their quantum computing hardware, right? So I mean, some companies will power through, and some will die, but I think there's an opening now for either a new generation of big tech companies to come and dethrone the previous generation of big tech companies, or for AGI and advanced narrow AI to develop in an open source and more decentralized way than what we've seen. And I mean, just as Google seemed to come and Amazon seemed to come out of nowhere, I mean, and pioneer a whole new way of doing things. I mean, you could have a decentralized, open conglomeration of entities and organizations rise and dominate the next phase of AI in a couple-year period faster than people are anticipating.
And some of that groundwork's already been laid, Ben, because, well, I know Singularity Net's been on the blockchain for years. You know, we now, for almost 2 years, have been pretty heavy into the blockchain. I have a crypto and DeFi academy. I took my finance background and we went heavy into it. We've had, you know, most of the layer one heads, the metaverse heads on this show for like long, deep conversations. And so we've been talking about Web3 versus Web2 for a long time. We've also directly experienced censorship, which is really a Web2 phenomenon. So we've been really seeing how these companies are potentially on their last legs anyways, and people want ownership of information. They want peer-to-peer transactions, which is interesting because this is happening right when this narrow AI potentially becoming AGI is happening. At the same time, when you're saying it can be even better open source, we've seen through crypto that open source works really well to create these new systems, and the new generation wants it. Do you ever wake up sometimes, Ben, and say, wait a second, this is the perfect storm, what's happening right now, between maybe death of Web 2, growth of the blockchain, AI and AGI becoming a reality? Is that what you see?
Yeah, so in the bigger picture, it's a perfect storm, which is fascinating, right? And as you say, the rise of AI, the maturation of blockchains, the frustration of the public with the nature of, you know, content regulation and social networks. In the big picture, absolutely so. And when you look with a magnifying glass at the details of the state of advancement of the various technologies involved, then it becomes more complex and frustrating. You're like striving to get a certain bit of technology mature enough to actually use, right? So I mean, as one example, on the AI side, I mean, you see these large language models are pretty smart, but they also bloviate and make up a bunch of bullshit that makes no sense. And so you want to be able to combine them with a reasoning system that understands reality and can combine its imagination with insights into patterns gained from real world data and so forth. So we're looking at doing that now, combining large language models with OpenCog based reasoning. So we can extract well structured logical knowledge from large language models. And then we can apply a reasoning engine to that logical knowledge. And then we can sift out a bunch of the bullshit and we can make, more sensible stuff coming out of our logic engine that incorporates all the knowledge in the language model. But, we're working on scaling up the reasoning in OpenCog. So we're building a new version of OpenCog that's more large scale. And, we're probably a year away from having a really scalable version of OpenCog engine that can work at the scale that large language models do. Then you look at GPU hardware. So this is well suited for neural nets. It's not that well suited for OpenCog based machine reasoning. So I'm working with my friend Rachel St. Clair on an OpenCog chip, which is a new chip design that's optimized for machine reasoning and OpenCog based AI rather than for neural networks. And, given the slowdown in the global macro economy, we're getting some money in for this chip project, but it's being slower than one would like, right? So, and then on the blockchain side, blockchain is a lot better than it used to be. Still, you can't put like the atomic thought processes of an AI on chain in a blockchain. They're like each transaction that you do in a blockchain is still too slow and expensive. I mean, Ethereum and Bitcoin are incredibly slow and expensive. We've been working with Cardano, which is faster and cheaper, but still it's like, I don't know, 10, 15 cents or something for a Cardano transaction, right? I mean, that's ridiculously costly, right? So now we're working on a new blockchain infrastructure called Hypercycle, which gets rid of the ledger. So it's a ledgerless blockchain, and it's incredibly fast. But again, we've got maybe 18 months of development before Hypercycle is really ready to go. And then we can have a blockchain where like the individual thought process inside an AI, like a neuron firing in an AI could be on chain. Or if you're in social media systems, say every time you rate someone's or give a thumbs up to what someone said, that can go on the blockchain, then it's cheap and fast, right? But all these things that are like, okay, we need another year on this, we need another 18 months on that. I mean, in the big picture of technology development, that's a tiny blip, and everything is happening all at once in a perfect storm. In terms of trying to make these things actually work, it's like, well, okay, we've got to pull in capitalization for 18 months of work on this, for year of work on that, and it's quite complex to put all these pieces together. Now, if you're in a big tech company, some things are just a lot easier, right? I mean, there's $1 trillion tech companies. There's hundreds of billions of dollars sitting in the bank that they don't know what to do with, and that they can just piece together these projects in a much more straightforward way. Building things in a decentralized ecosystem focused on open source code and democratic networks. I mean, the ecosystem is more complicated, and on the one hand, that means you can be more agile. On the other hand, it adds a bunch of overhead to doing things too. So, I mean, we have Singularity Net, which is this blockchain-based decentralized platform that then, like, Hypercycle is its own company building the super fast, cheap blockchain infrastructure. True AGI is its own company working on commercialization of the OpenCog engine. Simulai is its own company working on the AGI chip. Now, that's the right way to do things. It's decentralized, so you don't have this like monolith that tries to eat and control everything, and then is sucked into the Wall Street logic being one big public company. So I think you get more agility from having this decentralized ecosystem of a bunch of little entities that are operating with interoperable open source code bases. On the other hand, it also creates some overhead and frustration, and that you're still, as well as building stuff, you're running around raising money and trying to maintain the business models of each of these little entities in the ecosystem. So it's but I guess.
But also the pre-singularity is key, right?
Maybe the perfect storm is a good metaphor, because there's a lot of mess and chaos inside a storm, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a storm is not a clean and orderly process either.
Yeah, but you're right. Like when you zoom out, it seems like the perfect storm, maybe from a 5 to 10 year perspective. But when you zoom in, you see, whatever that means, you see some really crazy storms on the inside, and it's not obvious how it's going to turn out. And like you said, if this is really about who dominates the pre-singularity, we really might only be talking about 2 or 3 years. And whoever can maybe put the right pieces in place by, say, I don't know, 26, 27, might really define the future of AGI, which might define the future of the next 1,000 years or forever. It's that important, right?
Yeah. So you look at like the AGI chip. Assuming we managed to pull that project together, so you have prototype chips, could be in a 9 months or a year from now, small production run maybe 2 years from now, instrument of factory, huge production runs 3 years from now, right? And then you can have AGI chips doing sort of graph-based logic and evolutionary programming manipulations together with neural nets on server farms all over the planet, much like you have GPUs on server farms all over the planet, right? So this sort of thing could catalyze emergence of singularity, right? So one thing we're doing in Hypercycle now, which is our super fast blockchain project, is we're talking to a whole bunch of Bitcoin miners about repurposing some of the Bitcoin mining infrastructure for running Hypercycle AI nodes instead, right? And they need different servers for that. So we're now working with them on how to buy like cutting edge multi-GPU servers. But I mean, it's the same physical plant, it's the same cooling, it's the same power, right? So a lot of what they've done to set these Bitcoin mining rigs is not about exactly what processor you have, but it's about power and air conditioning, right? So we're advising them on what servers to buy, and then they can run Hypercycle nodes on their mining rigs instead of just mining Bitcoin. Now, the next step of that, a couple of years from now, we'll tell them, okay, now you can replace these multi-GPU servers we told you to buy in 2023. Now it's 2025 or 6, replace them with our Simuli AGI chips, right? And then all of a sudden, all these Bitcoin mining facilities around the world are AGI chip processing farms, right? And then these are like the hub of the global brain running distributed AGI system, Singularity Net as the underlying OS, and the OpenCog Hyperon running this AI processes on these chips in the mining farms. And then there's a project called NewNet, which is another Singularity ecosystem thing that can outsource some processing to people's phones and laptops for things that can be officially done that way. So you can see a way of doing things there that's off to the side of big tech. And it's leveraging the crypto ecosystem in a variety of ways, including leveraging the server farms that have been built for Bitcoin mining to run key parts of the global AI network.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Ben, let me ask you a question. Like I said, for the past 2 years, we went really heavy into the blockchain space and metaverse space and really got involved in DeFi. And, we experienced censorship in 2020, and I ran for mayor, and I kind of experienced some difficulties running the campaign as well. And then we looked at financial freedom when we thought this is such an important human right. And our mission at London Real has always been to create a mass-scale transformation of humanity into a fully empowered, conscious, and cooperative species. Like, we kind of laid that out about 10 years ago. And so we created something called London Real Ventures, which is what I call the world's first media-powered investment firm. And we've got a group of our students, about 50 high net worth individuals, and we've been investing in projects that we believe are kind of the ethos for making the world a better place. And we also take our media platforms and we do capital plus media, and we usually bring the CEO in, and we try to really push this out to the masses. And we've invested in DeFi projects, metaverse projects, and some other things on the blockchain. And we're really looking into AI now. And I'm just wondering, advice from you, what do you think we should look at? I mean, what you're talking about sounds really interesting. It sounds congruent to who we are and in how we want to promote freedom and this kind of transformation of humanity into a cooperative species. What do you think we should look at? How could we empower the right thing happening with AGI?
I mean, that's certainly is a really, really big question, which has a lot of different aspects. But I would say the investment community, just like the media world, tends to all pile onto the same thing, right? I mean, that's sort of human nature. It's famous that VCs are herd animals, and then the nature of the news cycle is like that also. Like now all anyone wants to talk about in AI is Chat GPT. Just like in crypto, in December, all anyone would write about is FTX, right? Nothing else mattered. It's only Sam Beckman-Fried, right? And it was only Luna six months before that. So I think what's probably needed is to take a little bit broader scope, right? So I mean, within AI, I mean, there is other stuff besides large language models, which will probably intersect and interplay with large language models. But there's other stuff that's also valuable. That's going to be the next big thing. And there's all sorts of interesting tech companies and projects popping up in Africa and Central Asia and around the developing world that are not being funded, not being paid attention to, while VCs are all struggling to get investment into the same, Silicon Valley generative AI companies, right? So if you're looking at 3 to 5 years out rather than building up something 6 months out, then I think looking at a little bit out of the very narrow focus is valuable, and it's not that far out of the focus, right? Because I think other AI paradigms and approaches are going to be hybridized with large language models, and 2 years from now they'll be in the center of the focus. And once you have one African tech startup become a decacorn, then everyone will pile in there, right? So I mean, I don't think these things are that far out in the mainstream, but still, you wouldn't know it from looking at the pattern of what the mainstream media or investment community does, right? It's really everyone's piling onto small variations on the exact same thing. And I mean, I can see why that happens, because no one has any time to pay attention to anything in the pace of modern life. So like jumping onto what everyone else is doing requires very little thought and attention, and is not totally stupid. Whereas to pick the right out of the mainstream AI technology or the right African startup requires due diligence and actual thinking. Like as an investor, it requires really doing due diligence, which no one does. As a journalist, it requires like investigating actual information in the world, which almost nobody does, right? But I mean, that's to me where the real differential impact would be had.
Right. No, that's a good observation. Because, like you said, I mean, in the Valley, the VCs love to co-invest because it means someone else has done the due deal, or at least you can point the finger and said they do.
Yeah.
Of course, everybody went down the tubes on FTX, and everybody was wondering who did the due deal. Like you said, it follows
Exactly.
it follows a media cycle where a lot of the eyeballs are going to the same things, and everyone's trying to FOMO into these deals. So you're saying take a step back, maybe look a little bit further down, and then look at your core values. If you believe in the decentralization factor, and that's going to be a key component of AI innovation, then maybe look at that. And that's obviously what you've been working on for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, in blockchain as an example, I mean, I've been a big supporter of Cardano for a long time.
Yeah, why Cardano? Why did it get your fancy? I mean, obviously it's very
I mean, that's a fundamentally solid. I mean, the reason
L1.
it caught my attraction was because they're using Haskell for their smart contract language, and
Right.
I've been a Haskell programmer since the early '90s. But I mean,
And you always had some beef with Vitalik Buterin of Ethereum for using Solidity because you thought it wasn't the right language to program something as.
I mean, I thought Ethereum was really, really cool when it came out. Actually, I mean, just the idea of smart contracts, even though they're neither smart nor contracts. It's a weird name, but I mean that was a big innovation. It was a big step forward, right? So I mean, I thought that was that was a great thing. I mean, I think yeah, it's not a great programming language, but I think the use of the ledger is a bigger problem because just having this ledger with many copies all over the place is insanely inefficient by nature. And I think as Todas showed, and as we're doing in Hypercycle, you don't need a ledger to have blockchain. You can have each participant in the network keep their own history and the history of their neighbors. So it's kind of like a ledger, but sharded all the way down without any replicated database of everything. So the ledger is bad because it's a privacy problem too, right? I mean, you have all your transactions in some big database that everyone can look at. So that's really my bigger beef with Ethereum was not with Solidity, even though it really sucks as a programming language. It was that when you're building the next thing beyond Bitcoin, you should get rid of the ledger, which was there in Bitcoin because Bitcoin was built to operate in a domain where you have very few users. And if you have a lot of users online all the time, then the ledger is just a bad idea. But Cardano is a great blockchain. I mean, Algorand is a good blockchain. Elrond, there's a bunch of high quality blockchains out there. Then you have things like, say, Solana, that not terrible, but doesn't really have a fundamental tech innovation behind it. And then things like Dogecoin and Shiba Inu, which is like there's no original technology here. It's purely marketing fluff, right? And so it's not that hard to look at the blockchain space and say, well, there's these layer one chains that at least are trying to innovate on the fundamental technology level. And there's these layer one blockchains that are purely marketing fluff or shady financial machinations, right? And then the number of blockchain investors who care about making that distinction, unfortunately, is a small minority, right? And I mean the same thing holds across basically all sectors of the modern economy, right? I mean the people trying to identify really fundamental value and direct money there are a minority of people who are directing money around. And this is because identifying fundamental value takes a little bit more attention and energy than just piling on whatever has the best price dynamic at a certain point in time. And people are running around in a maniacal frenzy without more than 10 seconds to pay attention to anything, which is partly because of big tech and social media and the way that modern information infrastructure has developed, right? So that, I mean, there's a lot of deeper phenomena happening here where big tech has rolled out tools that psychologically get people in a frame of mind where they can't think or pay attention to anything. And then this frame of mind affects entrepreneurs, it affects investors, it causes investors to all pile on to things that are well suited to be bought by big tech and keep the big tech hegemony going, right? There's quite fascinating feedbacks between individual and mass psychology and the whole economic infrastructure, and it's hard to break through these things. I mean, it's I mean, I know I I become frustrated with the AI world because most AI developers now, they only want tools that you can understand in 10 minutes and figure out how to use in 5 minutes. And I mean, if that's all you want, you're never going to make a big leap. I mean, you're always going to just make a small leap from what was there before, because that's what's easier to wrap up in a simple to use tool. And I mean, but if you want to make a big leap toward AGI or some other fundamental innovation, I mean, you have to be willing to take a step back and think fundamentally a bit, right? And I mean, and you can get a lot of success without doing that, right? Like OpenAI didn't invent any fundamental technology. They took transformer neural nets that were invented at Google Brain, and they put a bunch of money behind it in an intelligent way, a bunch of machines, a bunch of data, a bunch of smart people taking technology from another company, and they rolled it out. And that's an easier thing to do than trying to invent OpenCog or to invent some other fundamentally new technology.
Yeah, those are really good observations. Ben, just to close out, I'm wondering, how are you feeling about the next 10 years? I mean, this is something you've been studying since you were a kid. I think you first watched those early episodes of Star Trek with William Shatner. Those are the ones I grew up on, by the way. And you got fascinated with
Leonard Nimoy, man.
Oh, yeah.
Spock was the man. Although I was disappointed as I grew up to realize I probably had more in common with Kirk than with Spock, personality-wise. Like, when I was a little kid, I wanted to be Spock, right? Because he's like super analytical genius who's never wrong. And if he is wrong, he'll acknowledge it impassionately and keep going. So yeah. I really wanted to be Spock, and then like you pass through puberty, you get all these hormones passing through your system. You get like a bad temper and start chasing girls around. You realize, shit, I may be more like this jerk Shatner than like Spock in the end. But of course, that was the beauty of Star Trek, is these are like two parts of the human psyche, which we really combine them both in ourselves. And I think that's what you see in the next 10 years, though, right? I mean, you've got the analytical bit, you've got Spock-like machines coming to the fore, but you've also got the emotional, passionate aspect of humanity, for good and for bad, like you saw in the Captain Kirk character. And this is also playing it out on the world stage. So I mean, on the whole, I'm an optimist, perhaps in a irrational or trans-rational way. Like I'm just optimistic by my emotional nature. So I have a spiritual or intuitive feeling that things are going to come out awesomely in the next 10 years on the whole. Like we're going to overcome material scarcity. We're going to create machines that can feed into our brains via brain-computer interfacing and help uplift human consciousness. And we're going to port into virtual worlds and achieve like states of intelligence and awareness, like going way beyond anything we can imagine now. So that's what the Captain Kirk in my head thinks, right? Like we're on the verge of engineered utopia. It's incredible, right? Now, on the other hand, the Spock in my head that's more rational or analytical is just saying we have no reasonable idea what's going to happen. We're entering into a domain of radical uncertainty, and there's a lot of nasty things unfolding on the planet right now, and a lot of dangerous possibilities unfolding. And we've got to be really judicious, really careful, and work really hard in order to make sure that AGI develops in a beneficial, open, democratic, decentralized way. So the first AGI is not created by some big tech company in conjunction with some government agency and used to enact, the narrow interests of one elite group in a poorly thought out way that then causes, global havoc to ensue. And the number of ways that could happen boggle the mind and are beyond our ability to even map out in detail.
I, 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 I don't think anyone in the world understands how this will be the most transformational time in human history. I mean, it really will. But the fact that it'll be compressed to a short amount of time and it'll affect so many people in such a massive way, more so than any world war, than any famine, than any of this. This will be incredibly
It's pretty
dynamic.
wild. Yeah, I have a 5-year-old son, a 1-year-old daughter, and a 4-year-old granddaughter. And as I go about like teaching them multiplication and division and reading and all this stuff, teaching them about outer space and the robots. I mean, just to think like by the time they hit puberty, let alone turn 18, like the whole texture of human life and the nature of the world they grow up into is going to be incredibly different from the world that we see now. Like they're never going to have to get jobs. They're never going to have to face like getting old and feeling their body kind of slowly deteriorate, which I'm starting to notice now at age 56, although I'm in actually pretty good health and condition overall, right? And they're going to grow up knowing that there's these machines there that just have vastly greater knowledge and understanding that they do, and that I mean that's just the place that humans have in the cosmos, right? And this is going to be a completely different world that they grow up in. And of course, I really, really want them to grow up into a utopic world of this nature where AI is just making their life incredibly good. Like there's already ways that I had to suffer as a kid that they won't, right? Like, I mean, when I was in elementary school, you had to have fist fights all the time after school to prove what a manly little boy you are. And that was just the way it was. And now, that doesn't happen in elementary school and in like middle class neighborhoods in America. You don't have these kids gathering, beating the crap out of each other in the schoolyard every day. And when I remember trolling through the town library where I lived. I read every science book in the town library, and I finished them all when I was in like third grade or something. There was no internet, like there was no way to like ingest all the knowledge that you wanted. So they'll never know that feeling either of just reaching the end of the knowledge that you could access because there's no more books in the library, right? You already have the internet. You'll never get through all the books in the library, let alone that they'll be able to put Wi-Fi into their brain and ingest all the knowledge they want that way. So, I mean, we have the possibility to create this amazing utopia for our children and grandchildren and ourselves, right? But yet, there's also the possibility that the big tech companies and governments in the developed world try to create advanced AI and AGI in a self-centered way, and then some guys in a biotech lab in the developing world just get pissed off at seeing their relatives die of curable diseases while people in rich countries are frolicking, and they release COVID 2.0 that actually kills everybody, right? I mean there's both of these sides, and we're at a ridiculous point in human history where both of these things are like near term and very palpable. I mean, this is what led some transhumanists to think they must be living in a video game. They're like, what's the odds of all history I would be living right near the end, right at a time when all this amazing stuff is unfolding. There's almost zero odds that in real life I would wind up right at this time in history. So I must be a character in a video game who was put right at the perfect time in history, right? I don't
Do you
I
believe,
don't
do you
quite
think,
think that way, but I do think it's a remarkably weird and fortuitous thing to be living at such a time, and it's pretty cool. And I didn't foresee that when I was a little kid in the 70s. Things seemed to be going more slowly, and my plan was to build a spaceship to travel at close to light speed and come back to Earth in a million years when things will be more interesting. But now, I mean, with the reality of exponential change, we can see things going to get a lot more interesting without waiting a million years. Just wait 5 or 10 years or so.
yeah, I think on the last episode when you were here in the studio, we both said, may you live in interesting times. And yeah, we're in them right now, Ben. I have boys that are 5 and 6 years old as well, and I'm working on their homework this last weekend, and I'm just looking at what they're learning, and I'm just thinking, will this be relevant? Will they be learning in this way in even 5 years? I just really looking at this as I see the world changing so rapidly, and it just,
It's crazy, but
stark.
then learning, mathematics has its own beauty, and
Yeah,
my kids are learning to play music, and
and language
I
does
love to
too.
play music for my friends and family, even though there are other humans who are better musicians than me, right? So even I think, yeah, learning about the world and learning to do fun and rewarding things is going to have value even after there's super AIs around. But it's it's pretty weird to think about the world our kids and grandchildren are gonna grow up into. But it's also empowering to feel like we have the ability to influence that world in a positive direction. I mean, people have never had as much leverage as they do now in human history, right? I mean, in the 10,000 years ago, how much impact could a person have on the future course of humanity? They can impact their little village, right? I mean, now each of us could do things that really impact the future course of our species and possibly of the intelligent species to come after us, right? So it's amazing and also somewhat sobering.
Yeah, very much so. Well, Ben, thank you so much for this conversation. I've been looking forward to this ever since the release of ChatGPT, and you didn't disappoint. Also, all of our followers and students have been waiting to watch this thing, and again, didn't disappoint at all. Fascinating ideas, questions, and I want to be a part of making sure that this transitions the right way. And because of the position we're in and the knowledge base and the people we know, I think we can change it or have an effect on it in a positive way. And regardless, I want to try. So I really appreciate what you're doing, especially with the open AI, the openness of Singularity Net and all of your projects. And let's continue having these conversations, hopefully next time in person. In the meantime, what's the best way for people to follow you, either website or social, or learn more about your projects?
Yeah, so people can look at singularitynet.io, and you can look there, and you can find out about all the different projects in Singularity Net ecosystem. And you can look at Goertzel.org, which is my personal website, which has links to my Substack blog and Twitter and my all the different channels by which I pour out my dubious wisdom upon the world. So, and SingularityNet has a email list you can join, which will give updates on all the different projects I described. So yeah, please sign up, follow what we're doing, and there's all sorts of ways that people with different skill sets can join in and help us work toward a beneficial singularity.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate that. And we're going to keep pushing forward. I'm going to be talking to you in the background, getting your thoughts on how we can make the biggest change. So really appreciate you. I appreciate everybody for watching. And we'll see you next time on London Real. Take care, Ben, and take care, everybody else. Bye.